Welcome, Małgorzata Bonikowska, the Center for International Relations. Welcome to our monthly talk, Zoom the World. Today we have a special guest, Michael Kennedy from the US Brown University. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being with us.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, Michael is a sociologist, is working on Watson Institute at Brown University, US. But Michael, your research is very much international.
Yes.
So you cover not only US society, which will be our topic as well, but globally phenomena such as authoritarian and democratic regimes and things like that. So let's focus a little bit on that because we have election times, you know. We just finished European elections. Soon we'll have American elections. So as a sociologist, how could you comment on the societies in democracies? What is happening? Why do we have so much of populism, so much as frustrations of the people?
You know, I've been thinking about this quite a bit because my last book, Globalizing Knowledge, in retrospect, was a very optimistic view. Mm-hmm. It was about the ways in which the world was coming together, about the ways in which, if we paid attention, we could be addressing problems. But today, I like to think of the time in which we're living as a kind of epoch end. Mm. We are moving into a completely different quality of life within societies and across the world.
In a sense that we are not as globalized as we used to be, or we are more like closing ourselves as national selves?
Well, some people like to say that we're giving up on that global cosmopolitan vision and turning into a world of competing regions or competing political units. That is true, but I think it's a more general phenomenon, namely that we are developing a kind of, I like to call it on Twitter or ex-Twitter, we're using hashtag polarization rules. And there are all sorts of elements which are pulling us further apart, leaving the middle very slight. And so therefore, if I think about my old themes around universities are being pushed away from the center into a kind of elite box. And people filled with resentments, sometimes quite justifiable, are being pushed into a world of fantasy where if you just had a strong enough leader,
like Trump, for example.
Like Trump. And this is, you know, I changed in my subjects in 2015, actually, when the primaries were happening in the Republican Party and no one believed that Trump could win. I also didn't believe it. But that's a character of the time in which we're living. The unbelievable becomes real.
So you try to say that Trump is not just something which happened. It has very deep ground, and it's a result of deep processes which were going on in the American societies towards maybe leaders who present themselves as strong, right?
So my colleague Yasemin Bavbek and I just have an article forthcoming in American Behavioral Scientist. Check that out. It's a whole special collection devoted to autocratic practices. And one of the arguments we make is that we often use this term strongmen. But in fact, strongmen redirects our gaze away from the actual explanation. The explanation does not rely on how great Trump or Erdogan or Putin is as a leader. It's rather that people are losing faith in existing institutions and are looking for some kind of fantasy. Like Brexit was a fantasy that would actually solve the problems of Englishmen. So we have Brexit and Trump in the same year being decided, and boom, look at the chaos.
2016.
The world has emerged.
So in a way you are saying that, you know, when our democracies, and you know, you can all observe that we are not very happy about what's happening in our democratic societies. It's like a little bit of chaos. We are seeing a lot of frustration. We are seeing a lot of protests, and then the elites simply maybe don't have right answers. So you are saying that in this environment, people like Trump, leaders like Trump, can position themselves as strong, which is not really the case. There are more political narrative, political marketing than a real reality, but people want to believe in it, right?
So they want to believe in it. And I think it's a really interesting thing to consider. What does it mean to be strong? Are you strong when you utter powerful sentences that have no meaning? Like, make America great again. What does that mean?
Well, it sounds great.
It sounds great, but it does not have real policy guidance. It does not have real practice. But the problem is that has become, and that now defines the character of the political contest.
So more narrative, more political marketing than a real essence of the
Right.
of being able to govern well. Right?
So, if we were to look at American society now, we need to be able to see Biden not just going through the laundry list of all of his considerable accomplishments. He needs to find a way of telling the story. And it's not just fighting back Trump, because fighting back Trump elevates Trump into that messiah or demon, either however you want to.
But do you think politics is like becoming really a struggle, a fight between narratives of two opposite
Yes.
parties, leaders, groups? Like, because we see it in Europe very much.
Yes.
We have more and more polarizations in our
Yes.
societies, but also more and more divisions into really two groups.
Yes.
And they fight. The vision they fight is more about how they talk about it than what they do really.
So I think, Małgosia, that you really do capture the political dynamic. But I resist making those alternative narratives equivalent. Because once we do that, we validate the fantasy as much as the grounded policy. So what I would propose is that we need to see Biden and all of the other grounded policymakers creating more compelling narratives. They don't have them. But we also need to work with publics to help them figure out why are they abandoning their own past principles in order to embrace the strongmen who claim to save them.
Principles like?
So the perfect example within the United States is the discourse around Christian nationalism. It is astonishing to most Christians who put their faith before their nationalism. It's astonishing that that their fellow Christians could be lured into this fantasy world by a man who is an adulterer, by a man who is now a convicted felon, all of these things which make him an outlaw. And here's the dangerous thing. Now we're not debating policies anymore. We're debating whether we could have a convicted felon as our president. Again, centering it on Trump, rather than thinking about what Trump can do, what Biden can do, what the GOP beholden to Trump will do, and what a Democratic Party, which is a coalition of many different groups within American society.
But maybe it's because it's a reaction, because many people would think, okay, American elite was maybe following certain values, but then it was a lot of things which were contradicting these values as well. So no
Yes.
one trusts anyone, and Trump's and that within this perspective seems to be somebody who was not really involved in all of that. And it's not so much important, his personal life, his, achievements as businessman. Now people want just somebody to throw all the old elites out and create something new. Maybe that's the fantasy people are believing in.
That is a reasonable point, and I would agree with it. However, he's not throwing the old elites out. He's bringing in elites that have always been around, but maybe not at the center. And so, in fact, one of the things that's obvious in Trump's policies is that he's going to make the rich richer.
Everybody wants to be rich as Trump is. Maybe that's another fantasy.
Well, that is for sure a fantasy.
But tell me more, once we started with American society, because being a sociologist in America must be very exciting right now. You can
Yes.
see all these changes the American society is going through. We Europeans believe still, I think, in transatlantic relations, that these relations are really important, and there is something which brings us together, the Europeans and Americans. I wonder how the Americans see Europe and Europeans, and how much European Americans are.
Yes. Well, I'm biased. You know, my family is Irish, so I always thought
European American.
Ireland-U.S. relations, and Biden is the same way there. And of course, I feel, even though I'm not ethnically Polish, I feel Polish for having come here for more than 40 years. You know
the country very well, yes. But Obama was an example of a president with no connection to Europe at all.
Obama had Irish ancestry.
Really?
Yes, and so he went back to Ireland as a favored son. But Obama signals the new kind of America. We are trying to, and this is part of what Biden should be doing more with. We are trying to build a multicultural, multi-confessional democracy. This is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it is likely to engender resentment by those once privileged by their race and their gender. So this is, the true base of Trump's politics.
But so he represents the, let's call it old America, right? Americans with white skin color,
yes,
mostly men, from middle of the country. Right?
But he's drawing increasingly on black men
mm-hmm.
and Latinx or Hispanic men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in part because he's capturing their macho.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need to be strong. We need to be powerful.
Again,
right?
A strong man argument.
A strong man argument. So this is why a lot of people, including some of my friends, one of my friends has this very clever title called She the People. We are counting, if we are supporting Biden, on women of color in particular, leading the charge. And here's the problem. People, especially black people, are not seeing Biden as doing enough for them. And Trump's macho, are you better off, inflation is terrible, you would be better off with me kind of thing. That's taking away black votes, or at least diminishing the enthusiasm
mm-hmm.
of the black population for Biden. So this is a major narrative taking place right now, is how do we reach out? And one of the clear things is that Biden has a list of accomplishments, but he doesn't have the ground troops.
But explain to me one thing. We in Europe look at America with some, eyebrows, in a sense that we don't understand why in such a vibrant society, as you rightly said, not so many now Americans must have really European roots anymore, but still we have two men, quite old in age,
yes.
Both sides, Democratic Party and Republican Party,
right.
didn't find anybody else to really fight. There are two white men, age of 80 almost,
yes.
fighting. How could you explain that?
Tragedy.
But what are the reasons for that?
Well, for Trump, he can't let go, because if he lets go, he will lose not just his identity, maybe even his freedom. If he's reelected, he can perhaps insulate himself from these court cases that are still going on.
But I understand his motivation, but why Biden is one thing, but why the Republican voters really stick to Trump so much when there are many other people in the Republican Party, much younger,
right.
maybe with skin color different, I don't know.
So we had in the Republican Party some really meaningful challenges. Governor DeSantis of Florida was the most obvious. He was identified as the young Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not the young Trump because he doesn't have that confidence. He's actually, I think, a Yale graduate, so he's not a man of the people. Trump is a Penn graduate, but people wonder about whether he really passed. And then Nikki Haley was this amazing alternative. She was the former governor of South Carolina. She was permanent representative to the United Nations, herself of South Asian ancestry. And she was trying to create the alternative to Trump, but she couldn't do it. So this is part of the power of the strongman. That it's not a political preference, it's a personal alliance, loyalty to the leader. Ah, that sounds a little fascist. And so this is to escalate the debate. There is a very common narrative in the United States that Trump could be leading us toward fascism.
That's a very tough word, but it still doesn't explain to me, in my eyes, really the voters with no roots in Europe, that they support really such an old style politics. The same on the Democratic side, even more, because Democratic voters are much more into different other groups. That's like right. Latinos, like African Americans, Asian Americans. Why there's no one else than Biden?
I think it is fear.
Fear of?
Fear of losing to Trump. Biden was the one who won in 2020 the primary, in a bruising primary. To open up the primary again would have had to require two things. Biden to say, okay, I can leave, and I frankly wish he had. But then it would open up the primary to who would actually win. I think it would have been better for America had to have had that electric debate, because it would reveal two things. One is that the Democratic Party is not as much a party as it is a coalition. It's a coalition of different groups finding common ground around reproductive rights, finding common ground around trade unions, finding common ground around electoral accountability, and many other things. But it was also profoundly a coalition around a multi-confessional, multi-ethnic democracy. And so here we would have been able to actually work out in a Democratic primary the contest, but Biden didn't want to step down. And I think it's because he feels like he has a mission. And if there is one of my leading concerns, he needs to have a mission, but it needs to be more than his personal salvation of the nation. It needs to be a vision for the nation, which is less defensive than it is visionary. And he's not been able to provide that quite yet.
Well, again, we are back to the narratives and to these kind of dreams people have.
Yes.
But let's go back to the society itself. Whoever wins the American elections, we will have to bear with it, we Europeans and the whole world. So let's go into the American society. How do you think the average American thinks about the world now? How much is he interested in really, solving global problems? How much the Americans will push whoever will be the president towards home, towards cleaning the mess America has inside its own country?
So no sociologist I know would want to talk about the average American, because the average American doesn't exist. I would begin by generation. There's a huge generational shift within the United States, and the younger generation is clearly taking the lead on climate change. And this is a potential unifying factor for America, but it's not going to be a unifying factor across generations. But we have to move in the next decade very seriously.
Many of these older generation representatives in America don't believe in climate
That's
change,
right.
actually.
That's right.
Trump himself.
That's right. But, they're actually changing their tune a little bit, because they can see that this is the wave that they can't deny so simply. They're getting more clever. So the generational divide is very powerful. The generational divide also is more conscious of, the younger generation is more conscious of the diversity of America. So they're not going to presume that the United States is a white European nation. It is, as I said, multicultural.
60% of Americans, I think, have a white background in the sense of origins of their families. They come from Europe. Less and less of this percentages.
That's right.
That case.
And it depends on the region you're in, of course. So, for example, the West Coast, especially California, is very prominently defined by Asian American ancestries.
Japanese, Chinese, right?
Chinese, Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodian. So,
by the way, China is a really popular language in the US right
yes, yes. And, you know, our universities are very heavily engaged in China affairs, right? So a lot of our graduate students come from China, right? So that's a really important link. If you were to look at the Southwest, obviously there's a very heavy Central American, Mexican, Latin American definition. So we would think there about those ties.
now. And Spanish is the second language in
Yes.
the US right now.
Yes. But then there are some pockets across the United States which have some very interesting demographic differentials. So I lived for 23 years in this great state of Michigan. I taught at the University of Michigan for 23 years. And Michigan is one of those states that is a key battleground for the upcoming presidential election. And it was very interesting to watch the Democratic primary. Everyone knew Biden would win. But nobody quite expected the surge of votes for uncommitted in the primary. And those votes came from the substantial Palestinian community we have in Dearborn, which is just outside of Detroit. And this reflects some of the challenges Biden has, and that is that he is being held accountable for policy. He is being held accountable, in this case, for the failure back in the spring to have moved a ceasefire.
We don't want to enter into international politics, but we all, of course, know that, you know, these groups like Poland, Polish people, it's 10 million living in the US. And we know also that Trump was very much into this group as well, trying to offer something to get support of these diaspora. But coming back to the society, if you can, it will be my last question,
Sure.
if you can just give us a projection for the next decade, how the American society would evolve, in what direction, what would be the key elements which have impact on this process?
So it is no doubt that our demographic trajectory is one of increasing diversity. That's a given. Very many people assumed that that demographic diversity would translate into policies that reflected it. And in fact, that can't be assumed any longer, because the people who resent that diversification of the American people are trying to design policies that limit the influence of those people, whether through gerrymandering, arranging districts so that the vote of people of color would be dispersed, or through increasing the power of state legislatures, which is typically dominated by rural parts of the state, as in Pennsylvania. So what we are seeing now is the impossibility of a simple projection if we don't believe in the eventfulness of this upcoming election. For if Trump wins, we will be seeing a very different kind of America, one that I could never have expected 10 years ago. If Biden wins, we'll be also seeing a very different kind of America, but it will be one that is relatively open to meaningful debate. A debate about fantasies in Trump land is unpredictable.
Well, I think both Europe and America have now a big question mark as far as where the politics will lead us. We have democratic societies, we have elections, but our decisions during voting time will bring us maybe a lot of challenges in the next decade, also in Europe. So I believe let's just keep, let's monitor the situation, let's have a constant conversation on that. I think we have to stress one thing, that Europeans and Americans have to understand each other better, because the stereotypes are not anymore maybe true, and definitely the stereotype that America looks at Europe with a special attention is no more really the case. And vice versa, actually. Europeans don't look at America only now, especially in Central Eastern Europe. We also try to be more globalized and focus on the European Union itself. Michael Kennedy was our guest. Thank you, Michael, a lot for your time.
It's a great pleasure. Dziękuję bardzo.
Brown University, Watson Institute. And those who follow us, please join us for the next Conversations Zoom the World. Małgorzata Bonikowska, the Center for International Relations in cooperation with Warsaw University Center for Europe. Thank you.